This is Focus with Jack Caudill.
Good evening, I'm Jack Caudill. Welcome to this month's edition of Focus. This month we're talking about cybersecurity. Three guests with us to talk about that. John Strand is the owner and security analyst for Black Hills Information Security. Jason Erickson, Associate Director of Technology Services at the South Dakota School of Mines. And Brent Gromer is with the South Dakota Division of Criminal Investigation. He is the commander of the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force here in South Dakota. The reason we're here right now is October is National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. The Department of Homeland Security says the idea is to raise awareness about the importance of cybersecurity and make sure that all Americans have the resources they need to be safer and more secure online. This year's message is own it, secure it, and protect it. John, we're going to start with you. When we talk about cybersecurity, in your mind, what does that mean?
Whenever we're looking at cybersecurity, especially today, I think that people don't have a good understanding of what the value of their personal information actually is. And it's all about taking that ownership for all aspects. Your email, your social security number, the websites that you go to. It's basically trying to be in a protective state in the way that you assess all of your online activities to try to make sure that you don't fall for some of the easy traps that attackers set all the time.
And Jason, how about you? When you think of the term cybersecurity, you're handling a lot of that IT stuff down there at the School of Mines. What goes through your mind when you hear that term?
Well, of course, we're trying to protect our student information systems that we have there. We're trying to protect student data. We're trying to protect the various resources that we have, and we're trying to make sure that nothing gets in and the right stuff gets out.
Now, Brent, you're looking at this from the criminal perspective there with DCI. In terms of your guys' work, what does cybersecurity mean to your team?
Well, certainly cybersecurity means protecting yourself from people that may look to do you financial harm online, but also with our internet crimes against children, it's also protecting our kids from people that would want to do them harm with the use of the internet.
Now, John, you talk about protecting your information. What kind of threats are out there that people should know about, that people should be concerned about?
The big threats that seem to be hitting the vast majority of people every day is ransomware, where an attacker can gain access to your computer system and encrypt a tremendous amount of your personal information, your photos and any important documents for you as an individual or for your business, and then making it accessible for you. I think that's probably the biggest risk that we're seeing today. But we're also seeing a lot of attacks where people are getting access to private email addresses because people use weak passwords and they don't use two-factor authentication. So if I'm looking at personal protection, those are the two biggest areas that we see right now.
Now, we've had a pretty big ransomware attack here in this area, hospitals over in Gillette, Wyoming. How do these things work and how do they get into your system?
Unfortunately, the ransomware attacks have progressed recently. It used to be automated. The attackers would use automated malware to try to gain access to as many systems as possible. We call it spray and pray. Hit as many systems as you can, hope you get into a few. But now we're seeing targeted ransomware, where attackers are particularly targeting hospitals or they're targeting financial organizations. And it's not just an automated piece of code that's doing this, but a person on the other side of that keyboard. And they're targeting those organizations. They tend to be a little bit more successful in a targeted attack, and their damage can be much, much, much worse because they're actually ascertaining the value of the organization sort of manually rather than just being automated.
How good are these people at what they do?
This will get me into trouble. A lot of the attackers, we joke about, I'm sure you all have heard of the term script kiddies, attackers that don't have very strong technical skills, but they do know a handful of techniques and they have a handful of tools that hackers use, and they're very good at using those specific tools. The point is, you don't have to be a super genius to be a successful malicious hacker today, and I think that that's a big problem in the industry across the board.
Now, Jason, how about threats down at the School of Mines? What kind of things do you keep in mind when it comes to the school, when it comes to students that are on your systems down there?
Well, I'll start with faculty there. I mean, a lot of the faculty and staff, for example, some of the stuff we've seen uptick in the recent year has been more so kind of phishing attempts. People that actually create email addresses that may look like it's from somebody important, like let's say from President Rankin, for example. And then they send an email using that email address to somebody in the chain of command. You know, they do a little bit of research, going on our website possibly to be able to figure out, who should they send this email to, and then they ask for something. Typically, what we've seen in the past has been something like, hey, we want, $300 worth of iTunes gift cards, for example. I'm in a meeting, I can't respond via phone. Can you please get me these iTunes gift cards and send it to me? And of course, it looks like, from all practical purposes, that it comes from a valid email address if you don't look at it too closely. And you might go ahead and send the information that they're requesting. Or you might respond back and say, hey, do you want them in any particular denomination? And they will respond back as well. And so that they're actually active in regards to trying to get this information from you and trying to get what they're looking for, which in this instance is, iTunes gift cards.
Now, Brent, you said you've been spent the last 10 years with the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. Yes. What kind of threats are there out there to families and to kids right now?
The threats are always there. We have seen increases in the number of individuals that target children for solicitation. Early on, 10 years ago, there was a larger market of individuals that were utilizing different software programs to trade in illicit images or child pornography images. And over the course of the last few years, we've seen a shift to offenders that will directly communicate with kids and try to get kids to self-manufacture these images through what's been termed sextortion, where they use the images themselves as ammunition to then extort or blackmail that child to continue to create these images or to escalate the amount of, really it's about control, but to escalate the amount of control and really the images and the creation of those images.
And how do these predators contact the kids? What should parents know about that, and how do they keep those contacts from happening?
Well, certainly parents need to be vigilant in monitoring their kids' online activity, whether that's through Facebook or Instagram. Most kids have made a shift more towards Instagram and away from Facebook. Snapchat is one that's extremely difficult for parents to effectively monitor Snapchat, and that the images do disappear off that child's device after a certain period of time. There's very few monitoring apps that understand the language and the framework of Snapchat to be able to effectively monitor. So it really falls upon parents to be vigilant in monitoring what their kids are doing online.
Would people and parents be surprised about how many predators are out there?
I think that parents would be very surprised to see how often their children are contacted by individuals they don't know, or the motivation behind even, that sexting has become a huge issue in our schools. So even the amount of kids that are asking each other for inappropriate images, I think it would shock parents to know what our kids today have to deal with. Most of the parents grew up in a time without the internet. The kids have grown up in a time with the internet. And I think that I know that the kids have a much greater understanding of technology than their parents and are very good at being able to subvert what their parents want to see or what they want their parents to see.
John, tell you about that online world changing from when their parents were there till now. How quickly is that continuing to change and evolve all the time?
This is actually an issue that's not just for individuals, but for society as a whole. If you're looking at what's happening right now, the complexity of technology and how it interrelates with our life is exploding. I have a refrigerator that has the ability to play Pandora or get recipes on it. My kids all have cell phones and Snapchat, like you were talking about. So the more complex an organization is, or like IT, the easier it is for attackers to take advantage of that complexity. And I don't think that most people are ready for that level of complexity where almost every aspect of your home is connected to the internet. And as somebody that mimics what bad people do as part of my business, that creates more open opportunities for attackers to take advantage of that.
Tell me about what your business is. What do you guys do?
Simply put, we break into places to help people protect other people from breaking into their places. So another way to think of it is Wizard of Oz. You have witches, you have good witches and bad witches. In the world of hackers, we're the ones in the white dresses with the tiaras. We're the ones that break into places working with organizations to help secure those organizations from other evil attackers.
All right, we'll continue our look at cybersecurity when we come back with this month's edition of Focus. I'm Jack Caudill. Welcome back to this month's edition of Focus, talking about cybersecurity, as October is National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And Jason Erickson is the Associate Director of Technology Services down at the School of Mines. A lot of students, a lot of computer students down there. Even with that, what kind of challenges do you see with cybersecurity, even with that many people that know what they're doing on computers?
Well, it's always a challenge just because, we're in an environment where students are trying to learn, experiment. They're young. They're trying to break things intentionally. So it's always a challenge there to try and provide the balance that we need to. We need to try and provide a lockdown stuff as best we can, but we need to also have some flexibility because sometimes we also have to deal with programs and different entities that are designed by engineers who are not security minded, and so a lot of that stuff is trying to maintain that balance.
Brent Gromer is with the South Dakota Division of Criminal Investigation, also the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force Commander. Brent, you guys also deal with other types of computer crimes as well. What are some of the common things that you guys see dealing with computer crimes here in South Dakota?
Well, we are starting to see an increase in business email compromise where a hacker may get into a business's network and be able to review their emails, and then at the time where a payment is going to be made to what appears to be a legitimate vendor, they will change that payment information to reroute that back to the hacker. So we have seen those types of crimes increase in South Dakota. As was mentioned earlier, we are seeing increases in ransomware and how those crimes are perpetrated. And the age-old telephone scams are still out there. Everybody that has a cell phone knows that they're getting constantly barraged with those calls, that most of them are scams.
Now, when it comes to investigating and prosecuting computer crimes, how different is that than the old-fashioned crimes?
Well, to some extent, they are the same. I've always looked at any mobile device as just another crime scene. All of the data contained within that device, whether that be a cell phone or a computer, is another crime scene. And we have to go through that crime scene and look for evidence that will lead us to the offenders on the backside. Technology does hurt us with the encryption level that we're seeing on many of our mobile devices. There's times that law enforcement just flat can't access the evidence that we need to try to prosecute these cases. So technology works for us and against us in some cases to try to identify and prosecute those that are committing crimes using technology or the internet.
Now, John Strand is the owner and a security analyst at Black Hills Information Security. As you said, you guys try to break into businesses. What are some of the most common mistakes that you see businesses make in their security, and some of that may lend itself over to what people may be doing at home as well?
Absolutely. You were talking about the human factor, right? The easiest way to break into an organization today, without question, is targeting individuals. If I can get you to click a link, or if I can call you up on the phone through social engineering and convince you to go to a website or transfer money, that is the easiest way to break into companies today. And I would say ignoring that human factor, not training employees, what are the risk indicators? Like you mentioned, spam calls that come in all the time. Or if you receive an email from your boss that says transfer money immediately, not training people properly to identify the warning signs is probably the single biggest problem that we see today in organizations.
Now, as you look at some of those things, as far as organizations go, what can they do to try to stop those kind of things?
Well, the user awareness training is huge, right? Number one. I would also say that we're seeing some organizations anyway, get better at training their individuals, but there's also the technological aspects of it. One of the things that organizations should be doing, if you're a small business here in South Dakota, is you really need to be looking at your IT infrastructure and making sure that you're updating it, you're keeping your systems patched, you're removing very old operating systems and IT technology, and trying to kind of clean house in IT perspectives to try to make sure that you're not falling too far behind the curve on keeping things patched and up to date.
So how much of this begins with somebody that, I should have known better than to do that? I mean, how much does it start with something like that?
It's probably in the 90s, whenever you're talking about compromises, where if you sit down and you talk with people and you say, oh, your system got compromised, it'll almost always be, well, I saw that ad and it was talking about refinancing my house, and I saw the picture and it had this young person in a bikini, and I knew that had nothing to do with interest rates, but I clicked it anyway. A lot of times people know that they shouldn't have done something. There was a little voice in the back of their head that said, don't click that link, don't transfer the money, but they do it anyway. But that goes back to training. If they're trained to identify the warning signs and they're trained to know to ask the right questions, they'll be far less likely to actually fall for those ruses.
Now, Brent, when you talk about some of the computer crimes, do you see that same thing where in the old phone scams where people, I should have known better. Do you see the same thing with some of the computer crimes?
Certainly we do in some of them. I will say that in some of the business email compromise cases that we've seen across the state, the hackers are very good. And at times the crimes aren't even discovered until weeks or maybe even months later, which again makes that case even more difficult to try to investigate after the fact. I completely agree that most of the cases we're seeing require some type of user interaction where somebody clicks something that they shouldn't have. And in a lot of cases, it is just that where they say afterwards, I knew I shouldn't have clicked it. We're lucky if we can get those right away because usually it's easier for us to then investigate those cases.
Is it tougher to investigate when the thief is halfway around the world and it's going through 4, 5, 6 different servers on their way here to the Black Hills?
It's almost impossible, especially if we have a long period of time. Again, with technology today, those funds can move between banks so fast that we truly can't catch it. And it's outside of the continental or outside the United States so fast that it's really difficult for us to try to recover that money that may have been lost. Like I say, time is really of the essence in these cases where if we do get the report and we can start working with the IT professionals to figure out how it happened, mitigate those, and then try to recover those funds, our chances are much better the sooner we get on that.
John, where are those threats coming from? Are they coming from every corner of the globe?
Everywhere. You see a lot of the cybercrime is actually coming from Southeast Asia and China, of course. China predominantly targeting businesses. It's more nation-state level sponsored attacks. But a lot of the actual cybercrime that we're seeing today is actually coming from Eastern Europe. There's a large number of people that were trained at a very young age at very advanced cyber skills, and then of course after the Soviet Union collapsed, those skills don't really have a government that they're working with anymore. And what happened is they continued to train other people in those areas. And many of those countries have very lax cyber crime laws because the country themselves stand financial gain. So they really don't prosecute as much as we would here in the United States, which once again makes prosecution that much more difficult.
All right, we got to take another break. We'll continue our look at cybersecurity when we come back with this month's edition of Focus. And good evening, I'm Jack Caudill. Welcome back to this month's edition of Focus, talking about cybersecurity, as October is National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Brent Gromer is with South Dakota Division of Criminal Investigation and the commander of the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. Brent, from what you guys see, what tips can you give somebody at home as far as keeping the family safe, keeping your information safe? That you see simple things that people can do at home to try to make that happen.
Simple things would be make sure they use two-factor authentication on all of their devices, on all of their accounts. So they have to get that text message to put in a code to access. That way, if somebody's trying to access that account from somewhere else, they'll get that text message to know that that is being done, and it really reduces the ability for somebody else to access that account. That's probably the biggest thing I would say. As far as parents, they just need to be vigilant and monitor what their kids are doing online. If they don't know what an app is, kids are going to different apps and downloading different apps every day. If they don't understand what an app on their child's mobile device is, they need to research that. Sometimes the best way is to sit and talk to their kids about it, have their kids explain it to them, and then the parents can apply their life skills to determine whether or not that may be an appropriate app for their child or not.
All right, Jason Erickson is the Associate Director of Technology Services at the South Dakota School of Mines. From what you see, what goes on with the students down there, the challenges, the risks, what kind of tips can you give somebody at home to keep themselves safe?
Besides two-factor authentication, I might suggest using some sort of password manager. I mean, all these sites that you access, whether you're talking banking or your email, insurance, all that stuff, you don't want to reuse the same password over and over again. And of course, trying to remember a unique password for every site is just practically impossible. So I would strongly encourage somebody to use a password manager to be able to store the passwords that you use at these various sites, and so that you can reference them when you need to.
And John Strand is the owner and a security analyst at Black Hills Information Security. What ideas can you give somebody at home to make sure they don't become a victim of all of this?
Those are fantastic advice points. You know, using something like LastPass for a password manager and using a two-factor authentication is monstrous. I want to focus another extra thing with an iPhone or a Google device. You have the capability of putting parental controls on the devices for your children. And I would also add, as a parent, it's essential that you have the capability of monitoring and you have the capability of actually shutting down and tracking the device, and sometimes your kids, it's helpful to find out where they're at, 7 o'clock at night on a school night. But there are apps and there are things that are available for parents. I really recommend that people turn that on their children's devices to give them a little bit more monitoring and control over what's going on.
Now, you've got an event coming up, the Wild West Hacking Fest.
Absolutely.
What is that?
So there's a number of computer security conferences all over the world. Some of the biggest are down in Las Vegas, like DEF CON and Black Hat. Well, we started 3 years ago, coming up on 3 years ago, our own conference here in South Dakota, and it kind of took off. We now have about 750 security professionals from all over the world that come to the Black Hills and do a conference at the end of October up in Deadwood, South Dakota. We're sold out this year, but if anyone wants to come, it's a great place to learn and get hands-on, seeing techniques and tools and getting talks from the world's top talent on information security.
Now, is that something you've got to be pretty high level computer knowledge to get into?
No. So some of the talks are very, very, very technical, but a lot of the talks are very similar to what we just had here, talking about just good, practical, everyday advice on keeping yourself safe. So I would say anybody that's a technological enthusiast and is interested in security, they should look into it for next year for sure.
Now, Brent, Dakota State University over in Madison has a cybersecurity program over there. How are you guys kind of teaming up with them and working with them?
The South Dakota Attorney General's Office formed a partnership with the new Mad Labs building at Dakota State. We are in the process of building another digital forensics laboratory there at Dakota State. And really it's an opportunity for the state and law enforcement to use the brain power that Dakota State has as a force multiplier to assist us in trying to examine all these myriad of devices that law enforcement sees brought in as evidence. So we're really excited about the partnership with Dakota State and seeing where that takes us into the future.
Now, Jason, how about over at the School of Mines? What are you guys doing to turn out the next generation of computer minds that are going to make all of this go?
Well, we obviously have a computer science program there that we have students going through that, though not security focused like DSU is, but nonetheless, they're going forth and designing apps and trying to be security conscious with what they're doing as well.
All right, kind of running out there. John, how much of a battle is this to keep one step ahead? The hackers do something and then you guys counter that. Does that battle ever end?
No, it doesn't, and it's going to put my kids through college, so that's great. No, but all joking aside, it is a constant struggle. But I think we talked a lot about the human element here at the table today, and I think it really begins with that. It really begins with people having a better understanding of how to protect themselves and understand warning signs for their children or their office or what they do in their daily lives. And it really starts with just education. I think shows like this are a great step forward.
So where do they go to learn? Is there a website? Where can they go to
There are
pick
tons
this
of
up?
websites. If you look at the FBI, they have a bunch of websites dedicated to training people for identifying warning signs. The FBI actually has a full website for business email compromise if you're a company. And also Black Hills Information Security. If you go to our blog, we have tons of resources for individuals and companies to help secure their networks, all for free.
All right, we are out of time. John Strand, Jason Erickson, Brent Gromer, thank you guys for coming up. Hope you'll have learned something about cybersecurity. That'll do it for us. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you again the first Sunday night of next month right here for another edition of Focus. Good night.